We studied what is causing these fatalities using science and data and evidence, and then we slowly treated it like the public health problem it was, and it got reduced.
Hey everybody, well, welcome back to The Blue Lens. Now, I know this is an older Obama clip, but don't click away because the truth doesn't expire. In fact, what's amazing about this exchange is how relevant it still feels today. What you're about to watch is a Trump supporter walking up to the microphone thinking he's got the perfect gotcha question. You've heard the argument 1,000 times before. Chicago, Democrats want to take your guns. Good guys versus bad guys. The same talking points that have been recycled for years. But then Obama does something that drives conservatives absolutely crazy. He refuses to argue emotionally. He refuses to get distracted. And instead, he starts breaking the argument apart piece by piece using facts, consistency, and plain common sense. What makes this clip worth revisiting isn't just that Obama gives a strong answer. It's that he exposes a problem that still exists in our politics today. Too many people have been trained to treat any conversation about gun safety as an attack on freedom itself. Mention background checks? They scream tyranny. Mention research? They scream government takeover. Mention keeping weapons out of dangerous hands? Suddenly you're accused of trying to abolish the Second Amendment. And that's exactly the mindset Obama challenges here. You're going to watch him take one of the most emotionally charged issues in America and bring it back to something politicians and media personalities often avoid: facts, evidence, and actual policy solutions. And trust me, by the end of this clip, you're going to understand why so many conservatives were frustrated whenever Obama decided to engage on substance instead of slogans. If you enjoy political commentary that cuts through the noise and focuses on what actually matters, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to The Blue Lens, and join our growing community. Now let's get into it.
The good guys, why then do you and Hillary want to control and restrict and limit gun manufacturers, gun owners, and the responsible use of guns and ammunition to the rest of us, the good guys, instead of holding the bad guys accountable for their actions? And Mr. President, if I may, I'd like to use Chicago, your hometown, a city that has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation, a city that for decades and still is under Democratic control, a city that has an outrageous and even embarrassing murder rate as my first example. Why can't we round up these thugs, these drug dealers and gang members, and hold them accountable for their actions, or allow the good people in Chicago access to firearms to protect themselves?
Good. All right. Well, let me, it's a multi-part question, so let me just say a couple things. First of all, the notion that I or Hillary or Democrats or whoever you want to choose are hell-bent on taking away folks' guns is just not true. And I don't care how many times the NRA says it. I'm about to leave office. There have been more guns sold since I've been president than just about any time in U.S. history. There are enough guns for every man, woman, and child in this country. And at no point have I ever proposed confiscating guns from responsible gun owners. So it's just not true. What I have said is precisely what you suggested, which is, why don't we treat this like every other thing that we use? We used to have really bad auto fatality rates. The auto fatality rate has actually dropped precipitously, drastically, since I was a kid. Why is that? We decided we had seatbelt laws. We decided to have manufacturers put airbags in place. We decided to crack down on drunk driving and texting. We decided to redesign roads so that they were less likely to have a car bank. We studied what is causing these fatalities using science and data and evidence, and then we slowly treated it like the public health problem it was, and it got reduced. We are not allowed to do any of that when it comes to guns because people, if you propose anything, it is suggested that we're trying to wipe away gun rights and impose tyranny and martial law. Do you know that Congress will not allow the Center for Disease Control to study gun violence? They're not allowed to study it because the notion is that by studying it the same way we do with traffic accidents, somehow that's going to lead to everybody's guns being confiscated. When we talked about background checks, if you buy a car, if you want to get a license, first of all, you got to get a license. You have to take a test. People have to know that you know how to drive. You don't have to do any of that with respect to buying a gun. And when we talked about doing effective background checks, it was resisted because the notion was we were going to take your guns away. I just came from a meeting today in the Situation Room in which I've got people who we know have been on ISIL websites, living here in the United States, U.S. citizens, and we're allowed to put them on the no-fly list when it comes to airlines. But because of the National Rifle Association, I cannot prohibit those people from buying a gun. This is somebody who is a known ISIL sympathizer, and if he wants to walk in to a gun store or a gun show right now and buy as many weapons as ammo as he can, nothing's prohibiting him from doing that, even though the FBI knows who that person is. So, sir, I just have to say respectfully that there is a way for us to have common sense gun laws. There is a way for us to make sure that lawful, responsible gun owners like yourself are able to use it for sporting, hunting, protecting yourself. But the only way we're going to do that is if we don't have a situation in which anything that is proposed is viewed as some tyrannical destruction of the Second Amendment. And that's how the issue too often gets framed.
All right, now that we've watched that exchange, let's talk about why this clip still hits nearly a decade later. Because contrary to what a lot of people think, this wasn't really a debate about guns. It was a debate about whether public policy should be guided by evidence or fear. And that's where Barack Obama completely took control of the conversation. Notice what the questioner did at the beginning. He framed the issue in a way conservatives have framed it for years. The good guys versus bad guys argument. The idea that the solution is simply to punish criminals harder while leaving everything else untouched. Now, on the surface, that sounds reasonable. Nobody disagrees that criminals should be prosecuted. Nobody disagrees that violent offenders should be held accountable. But Obama's response exposed something important. You can punish criminals and still try to prevent violence before it happens. Those are not competing ideas. They're complementary ideas. And this is where so many Republican politicians have boxed themselves into an intellectual corner. The moment anyone proposes studying gun violence, improving background checks, or examining ways to reduce fatalities, they immediately start screaming about government overreach. It's the same playbook every single time. And let's be honest, a lot of these politicians know better. They know nobody is talking about confiscating every firearm in America. They know most Democratic proposals have focused on regulation, not abolition. They know background checks are not the same thing as gun confiscation. But fear is politically useful. Fear raises money. Fear drives turnout. Fear keeps people angry. And some of these Republican operatives have built entire careers around convincing gun owners that every election is the final battle for the Second Amendment. Year after year, election after election. And yet somehow the apocalypse they keep predicting never arrives. That's one reason Obama's response landed so effectively. He wasn't arguing with a caricature. He was arguing with reality. When he pointed out that gun sales exploded during his presidency, he wasn't making a partisan point. He was exposing a contradiction. Think about it. For years, conservative media personalities warned their audiences that Obama was coming for their guns. Some people rushed out and bought more firearms because they believed it. Then Obama completed 2 terms. Gun ownership continued. Firearms remained legal. Millions of Americans still owned guns. The prediction failed, but the fear machine kept running. Because for some people, the fear is more valuable than the facts. Now let's talk about what I think was the most important part of Obama's answer. And surprisingly, it wasn't about guns. It was about public health. That's the part that often gets overlooked. Obama wasn't saying firearms and automobiles are identical. What he was saying is that America has successfully reduced fatalities in other areas by studying problems honestly. That's what responsible governments do. When traffic deaths were high, researchers studied why. When workplace accidents were killing people, researchers studied why. When diseases were spreading, researchers studied why. Data came first. Solutions came second. That's how progress works. But somehow when it comes to gun violence, a segment of our political system acts as though studying the problem itself is dangerous. Think about how bizarre that is. Imagine applying that logic anywhere else. Imagine saying we shouldn't study cancer because the research might lead to uncomfortable conclusions. Imagine saying we shouldn't study plane crashes because someone might propose new safety regulations. It would sound ridiculous. Yet that's exactly how some politicians have treated gun violence research. And that's because evidence creates accountability. Evidence forces people to defend positions with facts instead of slogans. That's what some of these political actors are really afraid of. Facts. Now, another moment that deserves attention is when Obama brought up suspected extremists being able to purchase firearms, because that exposed a contradiction that still exists today. Republicans often describe terrorism as one of the greatest threats facing the country. They support surveillance. They support intelligence operations. They support expanded security measures. But when discussions turn to firearms, suddenly any restriction becomes unacceptable, even when we're talking about individuals already being monitored because of extremist concerns. And that's where the argument starts falling apart. If someone is too dangerous to board an airplane, shouldn't we at least have a conversation about whether they're too dangerous to purchase military-style weaponry? That's not radical. That's common sense. And here's the broader lesson from this clip. Obama understood something that many Democratic politicians still struggle with. You don't beat bad arguments by shouting louder. You beat them by exposing their contradictions. The gun debate in America has been trapped for years because one side often tries to discuss policy while the other side immediately jumps to apocalypse scenarios. Background checks become tyranny. Research becomes tyranny. Licensing becomes tyranny. Accountability becomes tyranny. Everything becomes tyranny. At some point, the word loses all meaning. And that's exactly what Obama highlighted. Not through anger, not through insults, not through outrage, through patience, through logic, through facts. That's why this clip continues to circulate all these years later, because it reminds people what it looks like when a politician actually engages with the substance of an issue instead of performing for a political tribe. Now, whether every proposal Obama supported was perfect is a separate discussion. Reasonable people can disagree on specific policies, but what shouldn't be controversial is the idea that a country facing a serious problem should be willing to study that problem honestly. That shouldn't be partisan, that should be common sense. And that's ultimately what made this exchange so uncomfortable for conservatives. Obama wasn't attacking responsible gun owners. He wasn't attacking hunters. He wasn't attacking sport shooters. He was challenging a political culture that has spent years treating any discussion of reform as an existential threat. And once that fear-based framing starts to crack, a lot of the talking points start collapsing with it. That's why this clip remains relevant. It's not really about Barack Obama. It's about whether America is willing to solve problems using evidence instead of ideology. And frankly, that's a debate we're still having today. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to The Blue Lens, and share this video with someone who's tired of hearing the same recycled talking points without anyone challenging them. Because here at The Blue Lens, we don't just react to political moments. We break down what they actually mean. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.